Steve Jobs is known as the founder of Apple, although his childhood did not indicate tremendous success. Stephen Paul Jobs, along with his friend Steve Wozniak, developed one of the first personal computers, which received public recognition and a series of awards. Authoritarianism, scandalous behavior, and a difficult childhood are not the best starting conditions for success. This applies to anyone, but not to Steve Jobs. Amazing gift of persuasion, determination, and perseverance more than compensated for many of his shortcomings and helped him rise to the pinnacle of glory. Today, Steve Jobs is known as the founder of Apple, although in his childhood, nothing suggested such dizzying success. In his college years, he was expelled, but Steve continued to attend interesting lectures. He didn't have a room in the dormitory, so he slept on the floor in his friend's room. He collected and returned soda bottles for 5 cents to buy food, and every Sunday, Steve walked 7 miles across the city to have a good meal at the Krishna temple once a week. Stephen Paul Jobs was born in 1955. His parents, Abdul Fattah Jandali and Joanne Schiebel, were unable to start a family as Jandali's father and Schiebel's mother were strongly against the marriage. Thus, Schiebel had to leave town to give birth and put the baby for adoption. However, she made a promise to the adoptive parents that they would send her son to college. It was Paul and Clara Jobs who named the boy Stephen Paul. Thanks to his adoptive father, who worked as an auto mechanic, the child learned the basics of electronics and became interested in it. Steve didn't show a great interest in studying, so he couldn't boast high grades in school. I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford, and all my parents' savings were spent preparing for it. After 6 months, I couldn't see the point of my education. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life and didn't understand how college would help me figure it out. And here I was, just spending my parents' hard-earned money. So I decided to drop out of college and believe that everything would be okay. I was scared at first, but looking back now, I realize that it was the best decision of my life. Steve Jobs lived a difficult life, collecting aluminum cans and even experiencing hunger at times. However, his brief time at Reed College was not in vain. There he attended what he believes were the best calligraphy courses in the United States. He studied all the fonts and spacing between letter combinations, essentially everything that makes beautiful typography beautiful. And this knowledge came in handy when he and Steve Wozniak developed their first Macintosh. If I hadn't dropped out, I would have never enrolled in that calligraphy course, and computers wouldn't have such amazing typography as they do now. In the end, he received a high school diploma, albeit in a different city. Steve began attending the Hewlett-Packard Company's Science Club, where he saw a personal computer for the first time. Thanks to his own invention, Jobs met the head of Hewlett-Packard, Bill Hewlett, and even got a job despite his young age. He was only 13 at the time. By the time he was 16, he had his own car, experience with hippies, and a bad habit of smoking marijuana. However, Jobs didn't go down that path. Perhaps it was due to his acquaintance with his namesake Steve Wozniak, who eventually became his friend and partner. Wozniak was undoubtedly talented, however, he lacked the grip and cleverness of Jobs, so the friends complemented each other perfectly. Their first joint invention were blue boxes, with which it was possible to make free calls all over the world. Hacking phone codes was certainly a risky business, but the young men were very passionate about the risk and excitement. In 1975, Wozniak designed his first personal computer and presented it to the management of Hewlett-Packard. However, unlike Jobs, the higher-ups did not appreciate his invention. After careful consideration, Stephen made a decision that radically changed the lives of the two friends. On April 1, 1976, the Apple Computer Co. was created, with an office and workshop located in the Jobs family garage. Soon, orders began pouring in, and the first Apples were successfully sold. Meanwhile, Steve Wozniak continued to work diligently on the development of the Apple II. Jobs faced a difficult task: to establish mass production and distribution of personal computers, negotiate with investors and advertising companies. The Apple II was introduced in 1977 and made the company an undisputed leader in the global market until the early 1980s. The wealth of both Steves improved dramatically as their personal computers were being purchased not only in America but many other countries as well. A few years later, a mutually beneficial contract was signed between Apple and Xerox companies. Xerox's innovative developments were very useful for the Macintosh, a new project that combined the main components of a personal computer: the system unit, keyboard, and monitor. With the help of a mouse, many commands could be executed. This was a significant step forward, and the Macintosh became incredibly popular. However, not everyone was pleased with Jobs' leadership style. In 1985, he was fired from his own company. While this may have caused panic for many, it did not for Steve Jobs. He continued to work actively and created the company next, while also acquiring a graphics studio. Jobs' business acumen was also evident here. He purchased the studio for $5 million and later sold it for $7.5 billion. However, things were getting worse and worse at Apple until Jobs returned to the company in 1997. Within a year, the corporation began to make a profit again. Under Jobs' leadership, iTunes, iMac, iPhone, iPod, and iPad were developed, which made Apple one of the most prestigious and well-known companies in the global market. Steve Paul Jobs passed away in 2011 after a long illness, leaving behind a thriving company capable of always being a leader.